guys, it's Ilian and it's Friday still, the 10th, yes, 10th of July 2020, and after this morning's developments, which you may or may not have seen, depends rather how you're going to view this here. I just didn't want it to leave. I didn't want to leave it like this. In case, I don't know, it's just not my style. It was this morning, I was howled awake again by my cat, the fourth time this week, I think, at something around 5 o'clock. And because it's fairly light, fairly early still in July in the Netherlands. And, you go to bed, even if you go to bed at 10 o'clock, still it's really light outside, so you don't get enough sleep, and that's driving me bonkers. So that was part of the reason, and then the cat waking me up again early, too early, for me. I somehow get, but there's more things going on at the moment, so that's why I'm doing a witchy check-in of sorts. Hopefully keep it to quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and we'll see how this goes, okay? Because there is astrological intel which is of interest to me, which explains to me, or could explain how I'm doing in general. There's also a sorts of things coming together really at the moment which give me a lot of irritability, a lot of a sense of being, I'm struggling all over the place, and it's bothering me. So the one thing that I've been struggling with again is my tonsils. They've been really quiet for the past couple of months, and I've realized that actually when I struggle with my tonsils, it is because of some sort of emotional exhaustion going on. But it is happening in my body, right? So it's in my metabolism. There's something going on. And no matter how much hot water I drink, I've drunk lots of hot water, and yesterday and today as well. So it's not that it isn't manageable, but it hurts, it's uncomfortable, and it has been a lot worse. It's actually not so bad compared to those times. But I don't want to see it again. I don't want to experience this ever again. Thank you very much. And so, that's basically my problem, where I think that once I, slow down slightly from my regular routine of how I do things in my life, if I slow down enough, I will actually, take a breather and realize that I am exhausted. And that what with everything that's been going on over the past months in the world, in my own life and in my husband's life and all the rest of it, it would be really weird and really strange if I didn't feel exactly the way I feel. So it's not that it doesn't make sense. It makes plenty sense, and I need more sleep. I need simply to be able to do my 8 hours or even more, if possible. And my body's having a hard time doing that. I will be going on a walk for an hour or so when husband gets back home. He was, he was in with this whole story this morning for a while. I started recording my little videos that I did this morning after he'd left, because I was encountering, sometimes I just feel like my channel is the place to go to share particular types of this type of vulnerability developments, whatever you want to call that. It's and it was useful to me because I was really I'm still working with this thought, this idea of how I realized I found out, I figured out finally in the end, at the end of the third session, that neither of my female line ancestors, as far as I back as I can tell, ever really grew up to be an adult woman. That's a very new perspective for me, And I realized it because I sort of visualized or saw my mother all of a sudden in a frame or in a situation where she was a lot younger. She was more or less the age, I think, that she was when I was born. She was 32 when I was born, so she wasn't like extremely young. But I knew her when I was, interacting with her and growing up. She was already around 50, so she was my age now. And she was in the image that I had of her, she was suddenly way younger than that. And strikingly looked like her own mother in photographs that I have only known, my grandma, that I only knew through photographs. And especially not so much physically as in, her face or anything, certainly the face and the hairdo and all that, but in particular in the kind of feeling that she was giving out. I sort of, from the thing that I was in, I could sort of look in time through her and see my grandmother and even her mother before her, in the sense that they were all really people who'd had no help, and people, females, female humans who had a certain level of support, a certain level of cultural, social, familial, relational, whatever you want to call those, all those aspects, support around them up to a point. They had help being this particular person and no more than that. And then afterwards, they were all of them faced with challenges that were too much for them. So that includes obviously the, Jewish, not the Jewish, that's the other side, so that's my dad's side. But in this particular case, the Japanese concentration camps in Indonesia. But even life in Indonesia before the war, I think it was, for the woman that my grandmother could be, it was already too much. Too weird, too tropical, exotic. You have to be really flexible to be able to adapt to that kind of life. However, it was a colonial situation, and I don't think there was that much adapting going on. Everybody was always complaining about the heat, and they had to change their lives to adjust for the heat, and the during the daytime, the temperatures. I remember, actually, now that I'm talking about this here, my granddad saying, I have a light bulb as I sit here. It's just, wow, this is just insane. I remember my granddad telling me, or us anyway, telling me, certainly, he's told me this several times, that when he first came, he went to Indonesia on his own because he could get a teaching job there with a better salary than he could get in the Netherlands back in those days. And this was in 1925, thereabouts, something like that. 28. He was 20, I think. So let's say it was in 1928. He first went on his own. Then he came back, married my grandmother, and took her along also. He described how hard a time she had in the heat, the first week or so. I don't know how long that period lasted, because she didn't sweat at all. Which is like, huh? Is that even possible? Is that normal? Is that weird? I don't know. You tell me if you have any intel about living in a tropical climate, all of a sudden, and then what this does, I would love to hear. And what he did, he actually figured out a way to help her because she was really miserable. She was lying. He said she was lying on her bed, and she was, I suppose, crying or something, whereas she wasn't really a very emotional person. She was kind of a tough cookie. She was really, sick from the heat. and he found a great big bottle of cologne and he sprinkled it all over her. And for some reason, that relaxed her enough and she burst into a sweat. And from then on, that was kind of how she managed. She physically could cope with this tropical climate, with the apparently, from what I heard from my granddad, right? He was kind of a biased reporter in this whole story. He was always very motivated to show that there was no real problem and everything was fine, you know. But of course, I knew this when I had my little interpretation that I had this morning, except it was filed way in the back of my brain. I hadn't thought of it again for quite a number of years until just now. And it illustrates for me how hard it was for my grandmother to adapt to that climate. And also, not only physically, and because of, your metabolism has to live differently, and the food is different and all the rest of it. The fruit is very different, and it's all, my mother was born there. And so she was used from day one to the way people behaved, the way they dressed, the way they smelled, the fruit, all the rest of it. And she loved it. My mother always loved all that. And I do too. I have never been to Indonesia, but we've got a bit of an Indonesian cultural thing going on in this country here, where there's shops and things where you can buy the spices and some of the fruits occasionally. And when the weather is hot, I will make Indonesian style, spicy dishes. And some of them I actually managed to find the proper recipe and make them in a way that's more or less, like it should be. And they're nice and hot. It's the perfect food for that type of, climate. And I can see that it makes me feel better to eat something really hot and spicy, just like Indian food, basically, when it's that type of weather. Not now, because it's raining and it's barely 20 degrees. And they're saying the weather is going to improve next week, so I hope that goes for Britain as well, because I've been hearing the sounds of people being completely fed up with this stuff. So the relationship and the way they felt and the way they behaved between my mother's life in as a child growing up there, she inherited a whole lot more of her own mother's blockages, I suppose. All sorts of stuff that I know nothing about. So that's basically also why I talk about these things on my channel, because I grew up knowing personally from year 8 onwards, I knew only my mother and my grandfather. And I have, as long as we were living in the Netherlands, which was until I was 12, occasionally I have seen my cousins, one of which I've actually visited with recently, the girl of the two, and she's fine. She understands quite a lot of where I'm coming from. Then again, her mother is a different family, again, just like my dad. So we're only we share half this pie, this piece, And her father and my mother were siblings. So I didn't see them often. My cousin that I visited with, her and I, we can talk just fine. And we talk on Facebook occasionally, and it's not that often. She's got a job and she's busy, and I'm busy with my own things. My other cousin, I have also tried to have a contact with, and it's okay, but it's not happening that much. My mother's younger brother, I have lots of email contact with him recently, only, the past couple of months or so. That's going really well. He has different memories because he was born after the war. So he was born to the same mother, the same grandma, 15 years later than the other two, something like that. He was really a latecomer. And then when I think he was 9 years old or thereabouts, maybe younger, she passed away of breast cancer. And I've always been slightly worried, of course. I mean, I do my own little research, to see whether my boobs are still okay. And so far they are. But I've been always sort of, had a teeny tiny sense of, okay, I'm hoping, I'm keeping myself healthy. I don't want to go that road ever. So hopefully in another 25 years, I'll still be here and you'll still, yeah. My grandmother is because she passed away before I was born, was like a big question mark. And sorry about that. Yeah, okay, so I will have to go do something about that phone call probably. Maybe it's less of a problem than I was afraid it was going to be. What I'm saying is that I don't know anybody, and that actually through this personal work, I managed to finally make sense of a lot of what these people were carrying with them. And certainly in the case of my mother, her mother, and my great-grandmother, I think that they were very ill prepared for the lives that they led. And of course, nobody can prepare for concentration camps or anything like that. But even before that, I think that it was a lot less the society that they were living in, the way they were taught to behave as women. It was all way more than nowadays compared to my own life, say, about things being predictable, things being you had to be predictable yourself. You had to present a particular face. You had to look a certain way. Your hair, everything was always very neat and tidy. My grandmother wouldn't stand being in my house for 5 minutes with all this junk, She wouldn't. Her house was immaculate and perfect. So this is... I knew that. I knew about the housekeeping. I knew about the attitudes around that and how they were a lot more, strict in those things, and there was no personal development and none of that. But I'd never really connected the dots as to them being actually children on the inside, little girls. And they'd had no help beyond 5 years of age. They'd gone to school, they learned to read and write, and that was it. In terms of personal, I've gone to university. I finished university. I've read more books than you can fill a house with. I speak 5 languages. And they had a particular, the remaining relatives that I have a particular impression of me based on all that, whereas it only makes me more distant from them, and it makes it almost impossible for me to imagine where they come from. But it is also where I come from. So that's the message for this story today. I will go call my husband now because I want to know what's going on, and hopefully it's not a dramatic development again. It should be okay. Have a nice weekend. I thank you very much again for watching this type of stuff. Don't watch it if it's triggering. And the stuff that I uploaded this morning is recorded really straight as is. I know there's people who can really use that as well, for whom it actually serves a purpose, that I come on straight like that instead of, filtering and doing my hair first and making sure that I'm kind of a normal. This is normal-ish, but it's an act, okay? It's all, I don't know where the truth is anymore. Have a nice weekend. I hope we can have a couple of drier days, and it's still summertime somehow, somewhere. So see you next week, okay? Thank you for watching. See you then. Bye.